was a real admirer of the Old Testament, not so much of the New Testament. He thought it was a sin for Europe to have glued the New Testament onto the Old Testament, because he thought the Old Testament was a really accurate representation of the phenomenology of being. It's like, stay awake, speak properly, be honest, or watch the hell out, because things will come your way that you just do not want to see at all. And it might not just be you, it might be everyone you know and everything about your culture that is demolished for generation after generation. It's like, stay awake and be careful. And I think that people only don't believe that when they're being hubristic. And I think that most people know that deep in their hearts. You know, when you get high on your horse, that happens fairly often. If you have any sense, you think, geez, I better be careful and tap myself down a fair bit, because if I get too puffed up, man, something's going to come along and take me out at the knees. And everyone knows that. Pride comes before a fall. It's like, if you have any, that's why it says in the Old Testament that fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. It's like, I've never, in all my years as a clinical psychologist, and this is something that really does terrify me, I have never seen anyone ever get away with anything at all, even once. You know, there's that old idea that God has a book, you know, and keeps track of everything in heaven. It's like, okay, you know, maybe it's not a book. Fine. But that is a really useful thing to think about, because, well, and maybe you disagree. Maybe you think people get away with things all the time. I tell you, I've never seen it. What I see instead is that thing happens, right? Someone twists the fabric of reality. And they do it successfully because it doesn't snap back at them that moment. And then like 2 years later, something unravels. And they get walloped and they think, oh my God, that's so unfair. And then we track it. It's like, well, what happened before that? This. Well, and then what? This. And then what? This. And then what? Oh, this. Oh, that's where it went wrong. It's, yeah, because you can't twist the fabric of reality without having it snap back. It doesn't work that way, and why would it? Because what are you going to do? Twist the fabric of reality? I don't think so. I think it's bigger than you. You know, and I think that one of the things that really tempts people is the idea that, well, I can get away with it. It's like, yeah, you try. You see how well that works. It's like you get away with nothing. And that is the beginning of wisdom. And it's something that deeply terrifies me. And, you know, ever since last September, when I came to more like broader public attention, one of the things, I've been terrified of making a mistake, because I certainly know I'm more than capable of making a mistake. And thank God so far, either I haven't made one or no one's found out about it. So, but it's like, you know, we walk on a very thin and narrow edge. And we're very lucky when things aren't degenerating into chaos around us or rapidly moving to far too much order. And it's not an easy thing to stay on that line. And you can tell when you're on that line, because the things are deeply meaningful and engaging when you're on that line. But if you're not existentially terrified about the consequences of wavering off that, then you are truly not awake. So, and that's what I see in this picture. You know, it's like, look out, man, because there are rules. And if you break them, God help you. So one of the things that seems to me the case with regard, and I mentioned this in the question period a bit last time, is that one of the things that seems to be actually one of the advantages to gluing the New Testament onto the Old Testament is the idea of a transformation in morality that is analogous to the Piagetian idea that after you learn to play by the rules, you can learn to make the rules, because I think that's actually what happens to some degree in the transition between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Because in the Old Testament, most morality is prohibition. Here are things you shouldn't do. It's like, you know, fair enough. And that's a lot of what you do with your kids. Don't do this, don't do this, don't. Especially when they're happy, you're always going around telling them to stop being so happy, because all they're doing is causing trouble. It's quite painful if you're a parent and you notice that. But the first morality is prohibition, right? Control yourself so that you don't cause too much trouble. And then maybe if you get that down and you're good at it, then the next thing is, well, once you're disciplined, then you can start working towards something that's a positive good. And that's the transformation that seems to me to be fundamentally characteristic of the juxtaposition of the New Testament onto the Old Testament. But in these images, it's still something like serve tradition, serve the Father, psychologically speaking. Support the tradition, because you live on it. There, in the old Mesopotamian story, the Enuma Elish, which you can read about if you're interested in. The original gods, who are really badly behaved, they're like 2-year-olds. In fact, they're a lot like 2-year-olds. They kill the primordial god, Apsu, who's the patriarchal god. They kill him and try to live on his corpse. Well, that's what we all do, right? Because we live on the corpse of our ancestors. You could say we live on the corpse of our culture. It's dead. And that's not a great place to live, so you have to keep revivifying it so the damn thing, stays active and awake. You stay on the corpse for too long, and then the or the demon of chaos comes back, and that's what happens in the Mesopotamian story. It's like, don't be thinking that you can stay on the corpse of your ancestors for too long without contributing to the revivification of the system. Because the chaos that all of that holds at bay will definitely come and visit you. And you see that in stories like The Hobbit. Hobbits, they're nice, they like to eat, they're kind of fat, they're short, they're not very bright, they're hubristic. They have no idea what's out there in the broader world. They're protected, if you remember, by the Striders, who are the sons of great kings, who look like tramps. They have nothing but contempt for them. They patrol the borders and keep the bloody hobbits safe. But out there in the periphery, all hell is brewing and chaos is generating and forming. And that's an archetypal story, and that's why people like that story so much. Because that's exactly right. Like, we're the hobbits, and we are protected from chaos by the spirits of our dead ancestors. And we're too damn stupid to know it. And we think, oh, well, we don't need them anymore. And that, to me, that's postmodernism. That's what the bloody universities are doing with the humanities. It's absolutely appalling. And we will pay for it. So, unless we wake up, and hopefully we'll wake up, because that would be better than paying for it, even though being awake is rather painful. So then I had this vision one time, and I kind of portrayed it in this image of what the world was like. And I thought, well, it's not a pyramid. It's not a single hierarchy of authority. That's not what it is. It's an array of hierarchies of authority. So you imagine this sort of infinite plane. And in the infinite plane, there's nothing but pyramids. And inside the pyramids, there are strata of people everywhere, far as you can look. Some of the pyramids are tall. Some of them are short. They overlap. It's endless. The plane is endless. And those are all the positions to which you could rise. And everybody's inside the pyramid, sort of crammed up, trying to move towards the top. And then there's the possibility of sailing across over top of all of them and seeing how the structure itself works. And that's the eye that floats above the pyramid and that sees the structure itself. And the highest order of being is not to be at the top of the pyramid. It's to use the discipline that you attain by striving towards the top of the pyramid to release yourself from the pyramid and move one step up. And I think that's one of the things that's instantiated in the idea of for example, of the Holy Ghost. And I think that's akin to that. That's Sisyphus. And Nietzsche said of Sisyphus, if I remember correctly, that one has to imagine him happy. Well, if there's a rock at the bottom of the hill, then you might as well push it up the hill. And if it rolls back down, well, then you've got something else to do, don't you? You can push the damn rock back up the hill. And there's no shortage of rocks to push up the hill, and that's what we're built for anyways. And so let's go out and push some damn boulders up the hill, and then maybe we could have enough self-confidence and enough respect for ourselves that we wouldn't have to turn to hatred and revenge and try to take everything down, because I think that's the alternative. So he's not weak. That's one thing you can say about him. And the same idea represented there, right? That's Atlas, who voluntarily takes the world on his shoulders. It's like the idea of Christ taking the sins of the world on his shoulders. It's exactly the same notion, which is the notion that you should be able to recognize in yourself all the horror of humanity and take responsibility for it, because that's what that means. And the thing that's so interesting about that is that if you can recognize in yourself all the horror of humanity, you will instantly have a hell of a lot more respect for yourself than you did before you did that. Because there's some real utility in knowing that you're a monster. Now, and just because you're a monster doesn't mean you have to be a monster, but it's really useful to know that you are one. So, one of the things that Jung knew, and this is something that I find so amazing about his writings, and I think something that really distinguishes him, for example, from Joseph Campbell, who talked about following your bliss, is like Jung said very clearly that the first step to enlightenment is the encounter with the shadow. And what he meant by that was, everything horrible that human beings have done was done by human beings, and you're one of them. And so if you don't understand that, and to understand that really means to know how it was that you could have done it. And that's a shattering thing. To try to imagine that, to try to imagine yourself as someone who's engaged in medieval torture, to see how you could in fact do that. You're never the same after you learn that. But being never the same after learning that is unbelievably useful, because when you understand that that's what you're like, then you're a whole different creature. And I don't think, and this is something I did learn from Jung, is that you cannot be a good person until you know how much evil you contain within you. It is not possible. And it's partly because you just don't have any potency. Like, if you're just naive, if you're just nice, if you'd never hurt anyone, you'd never hurt a fly, you don't have the capability for any of that, why would anyone ever take you seriously? You're a domestic animal at best, you know, and a rather contemptible one at that. And it's a very strange thing, because you wouldn't think that the revelation of the capacity for evil is a precondition for the realization of good. But I believe, first of all, why would you be serious enough to even attempt to pursue the good unless you had some sense of what the consequence was of not doing it?